Hello, welcome to KotlinBytes. My name is Jacob, and in this episode we're going to be talking about classes. So I have a to-do list here that's going to walk us through 5 fundamental elements to a class. Again, this is Kotlin 101, so just the basics. In this episode, we're going to be talking about how to create a rectangular prism class. So first off, what is a class? In most programming languages, a class is just a holder or a container for code. It's a way to organize your code. The reason why you might want to do that is to either hide elements, and we'll talk about that in a later episode, or maybe you're trying to abstract complexity for other developers, so you want to simplify things. In our example, we're going to be using a class as a container. To create a class, you use the keyword class, and then the name of your class. In this case, we're going to call it rect prism. And that's all that we have to do. In other languages, you might have to add these curly brackets, but not in Kotlin. They're optional. Number 1, create an instance of a rectangular prism class. Let's create the instance. I'm going to create a variable called myRectPrism. And in Kotlin, all you have to do to create an instance is call it prism with 2 parentheses here. If you're coming from Java, you're probably used to using the new keyword. In Kotlin, you cannot use it at all. So it'll actually error out. The compiler knows that this is instantiating a new instance by the parentheses. Alrighty, on to number 2. Add constructor parameters for width, height, and depth. We're going to make this class a little bit more useful. And to do that, we add parentheses to our class definition. And I'm going to add the width, height, and depth. And we'll make each of a type float. Okay, so we have width, height, and depth. So we'll see that we have this error up here because now it's expected that we add width, height, and depth. So let's do so. 1, 2, 3. And of course we have to define these as floats. In Kotlin, both constructor parameters as well as function parameters can be named. So we can name width, height, and depth. Just like that. And maybe this is easier to read, especially if you're looking at this code for the first time. On to number 3. We're going to add a secondary constructor for a cube. So if you're trying to create a cube using this object, a cube has the same side length for its width, height, and depth. So it would be nice if we had an option to just enter that in once. To do so, we have to add the curly brackets. And we then add this keyword constructor. And this is going to add a secondary constructor. We're going to add a new parameter. This parameter is going to be called side. And then finally, we have to call the main constructor by defining this. And then we pass in the width, height, and depth, which is all side. And there you go. We're going to create a new variable called myCube. And if we only add one item, it's going to default to side. However, we could also name it like before. Okay, on to number 4. We're going to print some of the member properties. In this case, we have width, height, and depth. Traditionally in Java, you would create getter functions that would retrieve these properties. However, Kotlin creates all the getters for you. All that we have to do is to define the parameters as either a val or a var. So let's do that. And once we've done that, let's print out myRectPrism.depth. So as you saw here, we have access to the depth, the height, and the width. Notice how we do not have access to the side, and that's because there is no val in front of it. In fact, you can't even add a val to the secondary constructor, but let's say depth didn't have val in front of it, you would have no access to it. Just height and width. Let's add that back. 1, 2, 3. There we go. Finally, number 5, we're going to add some member functions to calculate the volume. So just like my earlier video on functions, we can create a function within a class. Traditionally, a function within a class is called a method. There's some debate on whether these are called methods or functions. I typically use them interchangeably, so I'll call them either a method or a function. The name of this function is going to be called volume. It's going to take no parameters and it's going to return a float. And that's it. If I print this out, and that makes sense. Cool. One last thing I'd like to show you is how to create a calculated property. If you're coming from Java, this is a new thing, and that is taking a function that has no properties and converting it into what it from the outside appears to be just a simple property. Basically, the rule of thumb is if the name of the function is a thing, a noun, then maybe it could be turned into a calculated property. So volume is a thing. It's an attribute to this rectangular prism. And specifically, it doesn't have any parameters. So a calculated property requires no parameters. So if there's a parameter, this will not work. So how would we change this to a calculated parameter? Well, we would add, in our case, val, and we'll get rid of the parentheses. Still have type float. It's going to return a float. And I'm going to remove these just temporarily. And then underneath here, we use this keyword get, and this is the getter, right? And we'll just paste that back. Okay, and this does the same thing as before, but notice up here, we don't call it like a function. We just get volume, and it's perceived to just be a simple property upon this class. What's happening in the background is this is actually being compiled into Java, and Java is turning this into a function. However, it's much easier for a developer to use it as though it were a property because, again, it's a noun, it's a thing, it's an attribute upon this class. Let me run this just to make sure it works, and it does. That's great. If I were to change these numbers, yes, everything updates and it looks correct. Awesome. So that's all I wanted to show you guys today. Thanks for watching. Give a thumbs up if you liked it, or write a comment down below if you have new ideas for me to share. So thank you guys so much. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.